Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi, and I'm real excited tonight. This gentleman has had 50 years in show business. He's been an author, singer, stand-up comedian, radio host, jazz singer, you name it. He's done it all. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the one and only Geoffrey Mark. And Geoffrey, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Believe me.
So, Geoffrey, let me ask you, I think you were like 14 or 15 years old when you really had your first introduction into show business. So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. 15, if we're talking about professional show business. I first stepped on a stage when I was 4.
Wow.
They put a beret on my head and they penciled in a little mustache, and I sang Dites-moi from South Pacific. That was my theater debut.
Right.
But at 15, my home life was not great. And I just said, let's go for this. And a dear friend, who is still a dear friend, took me to an audition. I didn't know what I was doing. I was greener than my hat. But I got up there and I sang My Darling from the musical Where's Charlie? And without a resume, without a photograph, they hired me, and they hired me to play an adult because they had no idea I was 15.
Yeah.
And so Little Abner playing Mayor Dogmeat was my first time I got paid for being in the business. My folks very soon thereafter threw me out, and I went into show business because I had to make a living and I couldn't think of anything else I wanted to do. And the next year I made my first movie with Peter Fonda. And the next year I was starring off-Broadway in a musical. The next year after that, I was working at the Playboy Club. And except for a period in my life where I drank and drugged too much, I haven't looked back.
Right. And it's a very impressive career. But let me ask you, you brought up Peter Fonda. I've heard so many great things about him. Just talk about being able to work a film, especially your first film with him, because, you want to talk about a guy with just tremendous credentials. It doesn't get any better than Peter.
It doesn't, except my reminiscence is not going to equate to what you just said. We were shooting the film on location in Arkansas in the enormously humid summer heat. The film, as best I was able to describe it to anybody, is like a modern day Shane kind of thing. And I played a sort of a town gossip who followed Peter's character around town and about whatever he was doing. I was cast out of nowhere. I happened to be there, right place, right time, and the director liked me. But Peter was going through a period in his life where he was having an issue with alcohol and drugs. So he would sit in his beautifully air-conditioned, luxuriously appointed trailer, trying to learn lines while we were out in the heat, sweating through our costumes. And I was wearing jeans overalls and a jean shirt. So it was really hot. And when your character is supposed to be reacting to what somebody else is doing, if they're not doing anything, you have nothing with which to react. And Peter just couldn't pull it together. He couldn't get the words out. He couldn't remember the smallest of lines. You'd work for 20 minutes and he'd hide in his dressing room trailer for an hour. And you'd work for 10 minutes and he'd hide in his room. The movie is terrible. Don't go see it. Fighting Mad. Please don't watch it because it's just awful. But Peter and I remained friends. And later on, as my career built and he got clean and sober, and then later I got clean and sober, we'd meet for lunch. We'd go to a place called Musso and Frank's, which is the oldest show business restaurant in Hollywood. And every time I bumped into him at lunch or at the Friars Club, he would humbly apologize for his unprofessional behavior. It's like, Peter, there is an expiration date of having to apologize. This happened decades ago. I love you. Don't worry about it. But it concerned him. It concerned him that he didn't give his best, because Peter was a wonderful man. I mean, truly a wonderful soul, and a great actor. Yeah. Except for that period of time in the middle 70s. And unfortunately, that's the time we worked together. So it was a mixed bag of working with a big star who came from a show business family, and the experience itself not being terribly pleasant. But the friendship that ensued was.
Right. And that says a lot about Peter, that all these years later, he still feels compelled to apologize. So that just shows you that, he really felt bad, probably not just for you, but for the entire cast in that film. But
Well,
the other,
he never saw any of them again. So I was his sort of object of, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
yeah,
Yes, he was a wonderful guy, and what a gift to me to have a friend like that.
right. And I'm sure, Geoffrey, years later, you looked back on that film and, like you said, you didn't think it was a great movie at all. But being a 16, 17-year-old kid, I mean, being in a movie for the first time, I mean,
Oh, sure.
you had to be thrilled, even if the movie wasn't a big, success.
I was thrilled to be in it. I was thrilled to be cast, and I'm having a senior moment. So those of you who are watching us, Google Fighting Mad, a major, major, major director cast me, and I can't think of his name. It was one of the first films he ever made, and the assistant director was brushing me off, and I was walking away thinking, well, I blew that. And then this person, I want to say Bob Zemeckis, but I could be wrong, said, no, wait a minute, you, the redhead, hold on a minute. And he interviewed me and took my picture. He said, no, we need you in this picture. You're hired. A lot of that kind of thing has happened to me through the years, where I'm in the right place at the right time, or sometimes the right place at the wrong time, and things just happen, like with John Lennon's assassination.
Yeah, and we'll get to that later on. But I wanted to ask you too, Geoffrey. I really do love jazz music. I think it's so awesome to listen to. You get that feeling when you're hearing it. It just relaxes you. Not only this kind of a two-part question. One, how did your love for jazz begin? But two, where did the love for music start for you?
In my home. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, from an Eastern European Jewish family. And although my mother and father were just not nice people, there's no other way to say it, we lived in the same house with my grandparents. So the first music I heard was Jewish klezmer music, which is kind of like Jewish Eastern European jazz. Lots of clarinets, lots of syncopated rhythms. The happy songs make you want to get up and dance, and the sad songs want to break your heart. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, Belle Yalowitz was her name, saw the talent in me. She had a beautiful soprano, like operetta kind of voice. She's the one who made sure I was introduced to Judy Garland and Ethel Merman and Julie Andrews and people who she thought were extraordinarily talented to be an influence on me. And I am forever grateful for all her love, certainly, but that she was the one who really taught me about opera and symphonies and ballet, and wanted to share her love for these things with me. And I did. I understood it immediately. And she was very proud of my career. She lived to see me win awards and become a celebrity, and she was very happy about it. Not so much the rest of my family.
Right. And the thing about jazz too, Geoffrey, and you did this a lot throughout your career. You played at many nightclubs.
Oh, good heavens, yes. All
Yeah.
over the world.
And I mean, number one, the nightclub scene when it came to music was always so popular. But it must be, even if you don't have like a packed audience all the time, just going out there and doing it all the time in front of an audience, and you see how happy they are listening to it and how relaxed they are, has to make you feel good as a musician when you're playing, and just gives you that rush each time you're out there.
Oh, sure. Early on, the nightclub work I did was in New York. I must have appeared in every nightclub there was in New York back then. And back then, folks, because I'm not 25, was back in the 1970s. The late 1970s, but the 1970s and early 80s. In the beginning, the nightclubs there would book you for two shows, like an 8 o'clock show and a 10:30 show kind of thing. The early shows were always packed with people because folks, this is the disco era. Folks were out looking to have a good time. The second shows were always you're playing to 6 people or 8 people or 3 people. One show I did, I played an hour and 15 minutes for one person, but I walked away knowing that that person got their money's worth. And it taught me to be a professional, which comes in very, very handy in show business. Always do your best, no matter what is going on around you. Because if you dog something, then you get a reputation. Oh, he dogs stuff. He doesn't give full out. He holds back. No, not Geoffrey Mark.
Right. Now, let me ask you, Geoffrey, were there any influences in the jazz business that you really looked up to? I mean, was there a particular person when you would listen to his or her music where you would be like, wow, this is just unbelievable?
I don't think there is a singer alive today who has not been influenced in some way by Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
Tony Bennett was a big influence. Certainly, 6 or 7 places on the list is Ella Fitzgerald, the Count Basie Orchestra, Oscar Peterson, the great jazz pianist, Joe Pass, the brilliant jazz guitarist who became a friend of mine. You listen to everybody, you want to learn, and everybody has something to teach, even if what they're teaching you is don't do this. Even if it's like, ooh, that wasn't a good choice. All right, I won't make that bad choice myself. So a lot of listening to LP records, a lot of going to nightclubs, a lot of going to concerts, and just like a sponge absorbing everything I came around. And
right.
The great singers, Barbra Streisand was an influence. Dinah Shore was an influence. John Raitt was an influence, with big Broadway star. Anybody who had talent, I wanted to learn from. And then as I got into the business, I was fortunate enough that people like Steve Allen and Milton Berle mentored me. They saw the talent, and I think maybe that I'm a nice guy, and how much I wanted it. And they were happy to give their time to someone who had the talent, had the ambition, because they weren't going to waste their time with someone who had no ambition. They saw how hard I was working and helped. So I've also been helped by superstars. I always call myself the luckiest son of a bitch on the planet.
Yeah. And you talked about Tony Bennett, and the remarkable thing about him is I think he put on a concert like when he was 90 years old, and the place just, was in awe by him, and he sounded as good as he did when he was 20 years old. So it just goes to show that never let age affect what you do. If you still could go out there, you can be as good as you were 50 years prior.
If one continues to sing, if one continues to rehearse, if one isn't an alcoholic or a drug addict like I was. But as we're sitting here talking, I'm 35 years clean and sober, which is why I only look 43, because I stopped smoking cigarettes long before then. Mike is laughing at me. But there are people who are surprised what my actual age is, if I ever disclose that. I think I've reached that point in being a little famous where I really can't lie about. If I'm telling you I was singing in nightclubs in the late 70s, I can't pretend to be 40.
Yeah.
But for an older guy, I'm still good looking, and I'm still singing, and I try my best to take really, really, really good care of myself. And Mike's a good looking guy, and I'll bet he takes good care of himself too.
We try, believe me. But Geoffrey, you brought up Steve Allen as well, and that's a great person to learn from, because I'm sure that he not only helped you with the singing part, but he is also very funny as well. Great talent when it comes to incorporating comedy to his songs. And I mean, I'm sure that you were able to take a lot, because later on in life you would be a stand-up comedian. I'm sure you learned a lot of that just by being around him as well.
I was already a stand-up comedian long before I didn't meet Steve till the 90s.
Oh, okay.
So by the time I met Steve, I've been doing it. I've been in the business. I started in 1974 professionally, and I was almost probably 20 years into the business. I was not a rocket, meaning I didn't become a big star in my teens. I was known in New York. If you lived in New York and went to off-Broadway shows and went to nightclubs, you'd recognize my name. And oh yeah, he's the kid who sings "There's No Business Like Show Business" every night at the end of his show. But I wasn't known nationally. That took a while, and having that drug and alcohol problem kept me off the beaten path for a while too, because you can't do great work when you're stoned out of your mind. And I had to kind of re jump into the business after not really being in it for 5 or 6 or 7 years. And thankfully, knock on my desk, the business took me back, and I became what I've become, and I'm very, very grateful. So the people who helped, the big people who helped after I got clean and sober. Before I got clean and sober, when I was very young, Julie Wilson, who was a big time Broadway cabaret artist, Julie helped me. Julie liked me, liked my ambition. Again, they see the ambition. So Julie helped me even in how I dress, how to take care of things that are made with sequins, because she wore these beautiful sequin gowns. And I would literally help her off with them. And she would show me, you do this, you do that, so that you have your costumes for years, not knowing that wearing sequins would become my trademark years later. And that was because Rip Taylor came and saw me working in Los Angeles, and afterwards said, let's go to dinner. I want to talk to you. We went to dinner. He handed me the check. Was the best money I ever spent. He said, Geoffrey, is it okay for me to use language on your show, sir?
Yeah.
He said, Geoffrey, you are magic on stage, but you're dressed like a fucking accountant. And sent me shopping. And I only got one thing, a hat. And I went on my first cruise as an entertainer, and the audience fell in love with the hat. I couldn't leave my cabin without that hat on. Well, the next cruise, I had 3 hats. And the next cruise, I had 6 hats and a sparkly vest. And then my friend Kay Ballard said, wear sparkly scarves with your stuff. That was her contribution. And then Peter Marshall, the original master of the Hollywood Squares, his wife Laurie said, well, wear sequin shoes along with that. And then Carol Channing said, put on your diamonds. It fits with you. Wear all your jewelry. Dawn Wells from Gilligan's Island, who played Marianne, she said, I went over to her house to have dinner, just taking Chinese food. She was in a ponytail and a T-shirt and nothing else. I showed up in shorts and a T-shirt. She said, what's this? I said, what do you mean, what's this? What's this? There's no Geoffrey Mark there. I said, Dawn, I'm coming to your house for Chinese takeout. Yeah, she said, I'm in my house. I didn't leave. You left your house. Never leave your house without a sparkly hat on, some jewelry, and a little eye makeup, because you got beautiful eyes, but they're beady little beautiful eyes. Open up your eyes so folks can see it. Everybody tried to help me make my brand, which is important in the business side of show business. We could talk for 5 hours about the wonderful people who have helped me. I'm the luckiest guy on the planet. I mean, really.
Yeah.
How many people get to talk to Lucille Ball and she tells you ought to write a book?
Yeah. And let me ask you this too, Geoffrey. Doing stand-up, it's one thing to get up there and do it, which is hard enough, but you have to be good at it. You can't just come up there and try to wing it with jokes. You have to really, be creative. You have to really think it out like ahead of time, what material you want to use. And it can't be easy all the time. So what is the challenge of doing stand-up comedy?
Finding your stage character. Because the people who just tell joke, yeah, you may make a drunken audience laugh, especially if you drop F-bombs every other sentence. But people won't remember what your name was. I had to come up with a stage character when I was young and then reinvent it as I aged. I'll give you an example. So I first did stand-up when I was 17 years old. I'm doing it in a nightclub in Greenwich Village. Now, I didn't need to tell the truth about my life, but I had a pull from my life. So I lied and said, well, folks, there really is no father in my life. And my mother is terribly concerned as I'm becoming a man about town in New York. Uh, she keeps talking about protection. I need protection. Well, I finally figured out what she meant. So I took her Playtex living gloves and cut off the fingers. Now that got a small laugh. And then the topper was, it didn't help my sex life much, but I became the first kid on the block with dishpan penis. Now you're laughing now, and I'm an older guy, but imagine a 17-year-old saying that to an audience.
Yeah.
It killed them. It killed them. Today, I don't really have prepared material. My on-screen character is Geoffrey Mark reacting to his audience, finding out what they're about and just riffing with them about them. And then how I relate to them and how I think they might relate to me. So yes, I have jokes in my head. If I have a dull audience or a boring audience, or they're just not responding, I have jokes I can tell. But I would rather spend 45 minutes interacting. So that's my stage persona now. Without a stage persona, you don't have a career.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really true. And like I said, I mean, I really applaud so many people that get up there and do it, because while it looks like they're doing it effortlessly, there really is a lot that goes into it to, make it work. And I think
look at the late lamented Freddie Prinze. We were contemporaries. I knew Freddie. We were both young at the same time. It is true he was half Puerto Rican. He wasn't half Hungarian. But saying he was a mixture of Puerto Rican and Hungarian, he was able to call himself a Hungarican.
Yeah.
Well, he in his own description of himself, he's bragging that he's well endowed. That's a hook.
Yeah.
He figured it out early like I did. And unfortunately for him, he never overcame the drug part of stuff. And the tragedy of his life breaks my heart, because he was even better looking in person than he was on television, and so brilliant, such a facile comedy mind for somebody so young. And I understand that you can have that kind of facility and still be a teenager. And that he chose to end his life is just heartbreaking.
And let me tell you, I think he would have been around forever, because, I mean, number one, Chico and the Man was just a tremendous show. Him and Jack had so much chemistry between each other. But he really would have been, a phenomenon like nobody we've ever seen before, because he just had something about him that people gravitated towards. He really did.
That he was so smart was obvious on stage and on camera. That he was so sexy, which people don't talk about that very much. The man just radiated sexuality. So that made people kind of look at him. Maybe they weren't even aware why, but you couldn't take your eyes off of him.
Yeah.
Especially if he was wearing a pair of tight jeans. But he was a genius. He was a comedy genius, and genius happens at every age. You can't say you have to, be 25 or you can be a stand-up. Milton Berle was doing it at 12, and he was a genius, and he was one of my mentors.
Yeah, I mean, they don't get any better than Milton. I mean, they really don't. So let me ask you, Geoffrey, obviously the Lucy book, which is very fascinating, just a tremendous, the research that had to go into writing that book is one thing, but you had a relationship with Lucille Ball. You knew her very well. And, that's one death, Geoffrey, that bothers me to this day. I was a young kid. I'd say I was 13 or 14 years old. And I was following that each day. And it seemed like one day she was getting better. Then the next day she would have a setback. And then unfortunately, as we know, she passed away. But I mean, just following that thing over, I think it was like a good 5 weeks that went on before she passed. But just talk about being around somebody like her, because if you think about it, correct me if I'm wrong, Geoffrey, I think I Love Lucy was the first TV sitcom that ever was on TV, correct?
No,
No. Okay.
It is certainly one of the early ones.
Right.
But no, there were sitcoms. I Love Lucy was the first sitcom to be shot on film in front of a live audience using 3 or 4 cameras simultaneously taking shots and then edited together for one
Right.
shot. And I must correct you only because Lucy Arnaz will think I've been lying. I didn't have a relationship with Miss Ball. I interviewed her once.
Oh, okay.
But I have a relationship with her children and grandchildren, all of whom have been spectacularly wonderful to me. The Lucy book was authorized by the estate, and I didn't ask for that. That was a gift from Desi Arnaz Jr. I met him. I interviewed him for 12 solid hours.
Wow.
At his request. No, keep asking. When we were done, he shook my hand and he said, here's the deal. If this book comes out, because I promised both of them they would read the manuscript before ever getting published, and it's the book you're asking me questions about, I'm going to give you authorization. You can put it right on the top of the book. However, he said, if you write another book about my control freak mother and my alcoholic father, I'm going to find you and cut your balls off. Do we have a deal? And I shook his hand, and I hope he's never regretted it. I know Lucy has never regretted it because I'm a man of my word. I've turned down $500,000 to write everything I know about all these people involved, and I just won't do it. That's not where my interest. The reason the Lucy book got written was because there were a lot of biographies coming out about Miss Ball or Miss Ball and Mr. Arnaz. It kind of told the truth. Part of what they said was truthful, and then there's a lot of baloney in it. And I know all the authors personally. They're all nice people. Some of them have passed away, unfortunately. But their concern was more with selling books than with complete accuracy. And I said, this is not the reason we I don't watch I Love Lucy because of who any of these people had sex with, or who was angry at whom, or why they got a divorce. Or I watch it because it's brilliant comedy. And it is a safe place for any of us. You watch I Love Lucy, you're going to laugh your behind off. And you know, the end of 27 minutes of dialogue. Can you imagine? The show was 27 minutes of show and 3 minutes of commercials back then.
Yeah.
That whatever problem happens is going to get solved. Well, who doesn't want to watch that?
Yeah.
And it holds up today. It is as brilliant today as when it was first brought about. And Steve Allen wrote the foreword for the book, and Lucy and Desi Jr. wrote a foreword for the book. There is a new Lucy book coming out next year called The New Lucy Book. And I have a new introduction from Fran Drescher. Bless her heart. She was nice enough to do that for me. And I'm adding in all the films and all the radio shows that I can find. There may be some radio shows I'm just not aware that they existed, but they existed. So I'm not claiming it's every single. It's all the ones I can find. So it's her career under 2 covers, and it'll be out next year for Christmas, and I hope everybody buys it.
That's awesome, and I can't wait to see that. And you talk about interviewing Desi Jr. for 12 hours. So how long in total would you say it took you to write and complete the book? You know, never mind get it published, just get it all written and done. How long would you say it took you?
Oh, about 30 years.
Wow.
I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
I fell in love with I Love Lucy as a very small child. I was old enough to watch the very last of the hour-long shows they did in 1960. I was sick with bronchitis, and I was up, and my folks let me watch the last hour-long version, which had Ernie Kovacs and Edie Adams in it. So that's the only first run I Love Lucy I saw. But certainly the Lucy Show and Here's Lucy and everything she did. So you watch it over and over. It's the most rerun show in history.
Yeah.
So there was all of that. And then as I aged and I learned about comedy and I began to investigate just by going to the library, investigating whatever was known in that moment about them. And then I interviewed everybody who was still alive about the work.
Yeah.
And it was through interviewing people about the work that they told me all this personal stuff that no one's ever going to hear out of my mouth. Some of it is wonderful, but it's still, I promised I wouldn't discuss their personal lives. When I do shows around, whether I'm singing or doing stand-up, inevitably people want to do Q&A with me, ask questions about all these famous people I know. And they will ask about Lucille and Desi, usually repeating some bit of gossip they read someplace. And the first thing I asked was, why do you need to know that? And
Yeah.
Landers taught me how to do that, to diffuse questions that are none of your business. And I tell everybody the same thing. Take a syringe and a needle with truth serum, knock on any door in your neighborhood, quickly inject them, sit them down and ask them the same questions about their families and personal lives. And you're going to get the same answers, except the names they mention won't be famous.
Yeah.
There is nothing extraordinary about how Miss Ball and Mr. Arnaz lived as adults, how Mr. Arnaz got to this country, that there was a revolution and his family was part of the reigning politicians, and that he had to leave Cuba to live. That's interesting and different and fascinating. What he did as an adult, personally, is what every other young man was doing personally. But he was a genius.
Oh yeah.
He had tremendous talent. He was one of the sexiest men of the 20th century, and he worked really, really hard. And from everyone I've talked to, except for the few who have a beef with him, incredible good taste, hard worker, put his money where his mouth was to make the show excellent.
Yeah.
That's what you need to know about these people. Everything else is, look in your own mirror.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like I said, what a great show. And I mean, the fact that you got to write about it and, talk to their children and discuss everything that went into it. I mean, it's just, it's really fascinating stuff, like I said. And, another book that you wrote that was really popular as well was, about Ethel Merman, the biggest star on Broadway. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, first of all, it makes me laugh because the title of the book comes from The Lucy Show.
Yeah.
Miss Merman made a guest appearance on The Lucy Show. And for those of you who don't remember the scenario here, Lucy plays Lucy Carmichael now. She has housemates, not lovers, but housemates with Vivian Vance playing Vivian Bagley. Each has children, and they're living in the same house to save on money. Vivian's a divorcee, Lucy's a widow. And they wrote a show for Ethel Merman to come in. And Lucy is getting jealous of all the attention Merman is getting. And the writer's having her say, Merman, the way everybody treats her, you think she was the biggest star on Broadway. And that gets a laugh. And then Vivian looks at her and leans in and says, she is. And that gets an even bigger laugh. So the title comes from, you think she was the biggest? Well, she is the biggest star on Broadway. And the story of that show and how it was made is all in that book, as well as her 48-hour marriage to Ernest Borgnine.
Yeah.
So it did very well. And I like writing about people who are the very best at what they do. And while I adore Mary Martin, who I got to know, and Carol Channing, who was a friend, and lots of other really talented women, no one did Broadway better than Ethel Merman, and that's why I wanted to write about her. But in Merman's case, I wrote a biography, so I had to talk about the good and the bad, and about her personal life. Yeah. And I always say the story of her marriage to Borgnine, that alone would make a great movie. I don't know why no one's jumped on it. Perfect role for Bette Midler.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. But I think out of all the books, I think the one that really stands out more than anything else, you did 2 books on her, but Ella Fitzgerald. And the thing about Ella that's so remarkable is a lot of people in the business have referred to her as probably the greatest singer of all time, and put her right up there with anybody you want to put her up there with. But with that said, I don't think fans really truly can grasp the struggles she had to go through in her life. I mean, she dealt with everything a person could possibly deal with. And that to me is remarkable that she had the career she did after, having some very traumatic, things go on in her life.
There are persons out there who become famous because they're very good looking, or perhaps the woman is very large breasted, or they come from a wealthy family who's in the news. And then there are people who have, I don't mean any particular religion, but whom God has blessed, was given these gifts to. And Ella, despite living in a mixed neighborhood, which was a lot of bigotry she dealt with, because her stepfather was Portuguese. So, which are you, that kind of stuff from way back when. Losing her mother, running away from home, being in a home for wayward African-American youth in which she was literally raped and tortured on a regular basis, not just once. Ran away from there because she was determined. She wasn't going to be a number. She wasn't going to be a statistic. She knew she had talent and ran away to Harlem. She lived in a house of prostitution. She was a lookout for the ladies, so that if she saw someone she thought might be cops or undercover, they had knitting hidden all over the main room. Out would come the knitting, and Ella would be in there, and they'd be instructing her on knitting, and the police would come in. Well, whatever do you mean? We're having a sewing circle here today. She ran numbers, and the ladies in the house of prostitution saw that she had talent. They're the ones who put her name in for the very first amateur hour she did, and went with her to make sure that she went on. And in fact, the closing act of vaudeville before the amateur part of the show was a dancing act called the Edwards Sisters. Ella was going out to be a dancer. She was a hepcat dancer. And she saw these sisters dancing. She said, I can't follow them. And the prostitute said, yes, you can. And they pushed her on stage, literally pushed her on stage. The spotlight hit her, and the spotlight loved her. And she walked over to the band leader, and he said, honey, you got to do something. Sing a song. And she sang a Holy Carmichael song called Judy and Believe It, Beloved, and won the contest and won every contest. And in a very short span of time, meaning a couple of years, a year maybe even, not even, she was singing with Chick Webb's band. And a couple of years later came a Tisket a Tasket, and Ella never looked back. The most incredible recording career of anyone.
Yeah, and what I really think is remarkable what you did, Geoffrey, is you have a radio show where I think it's music dedicated to Ella, and it's called Geoffrey Mark Plays Ella. And I think that's really cool because you're paying tribute to a legendary singer who impacted you so much in your life. And I mean, I just think that's a wonderful tribute that you are given to her. And I really applaud you.
That. Well, you know, I helped her at the end of her career, choosing songs and giving her playlists for her concerts and her nightclub stuff, because Ella never sang an act. She didn't go out on tour and sing, these are the 14 songs I'm singing. She had 300 arrangements with her at any given time, and she sang what she felt like singing, and she had a certain order she liked to do her concerts in. Right. Well, as she got older and both diabetes was kicking her ass, and she had a quintuple heart bypass, and she was still working, but she began to sing the same songs over and over and over. So I stepped in and said, well, here, do this. And she used them. I mean, I used to be able to go to concerts and bring a friend and say, well, I think she's going to sing Satin Doll next. And she'd sing Satin Doll, and they'd look like, are you an alien? How do you know? Because if you tell people I chose these songs, they don't believe you. Oh, yeah, sure. But I just would sit there and smile. And happily, the Ella Fitzgerald Foundation, which is a wonderful charity organization, appreciates my book, appreciates my show. And so my show is every single week on a theme. Ella and Count Basie. Let's just pick one of the shows I've done. And I play what I think is the best of the best, and then tell you the insider stories of how the music was made, or why it's important, or why I chose it. I'm Grammy nominated for writing album notes for Ella's CDs. I've written a lot of album notes for Ella's work through the years. And I do believe, the world's biggest expert on Ella Fitzgerald. So I thank you for the plug, and I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I just think it's amazing what you do when it comes to that because, like I said, I mean, people forget, again, the impact she had on the music industry because you could put her right up there with Michael Jackson, Elvis, any big time musician. She is right there with them. And, you know, she really, in a lot of ways, like I said, I mean, her path to being a star was probably harder than anybody you've ever seen in the music business.
She broke racial barriers. She refused after a while to work for segregated audiences. And folks, she was on the road about 39 weeks a year. I don't mean, oh, she flew to Chicago for 2 days, or all over the world. Ella was in Japan. Ella was in Australia. Ella was in Brazil. Ella was all over Europe. Ella was singing behind the Iron Curtain before anybody else was allowed to. Certainly Canada, Mexico, all over the United States. She was singing live over and over and over and over because she loved to sing for people. And she was very intent that what she did was the best she could deliver. Well, that's the ambition and the talent part that separated Ella from maybe somebody who had 1 or 2 hits in the 30s or 40s or 50s, or didn't want to work that hard. Because when she was home, she was still working. She was recording albums. Between 1956 and 1960, if you include live albums, Ella recorded 27 albums.
Which is
It's unheard of for
yeah,
anyone else.
yeah, and I think she sold over 40 million.
Way more
Yeah,
more than that.
yeah,
And was the first African American to get a Grammy, and the first person to win 2 Grammys in 1 year. She broke barriers, and she did it with her talent. And she
yeah,
used her talent for good measure. And I liked her. Her soul was good. And it just radiated out of her. The love of what she was doing, her love for her audiences. She really cared about them.
yeah.
So all of that hopefully is in my show, which is in its 3rd season now, and couldn't be happier about that. And as long as we're plugging, so next year the new Lucy book comes out. So does my autobiography, The Devil Was Born in Brooklyn. And I tell everything. You people are going to be so amazed at what you read in that book about famous people that you know, both lovingly and maybe sometimes not so lovingly. And then there's a new show coming out. I'm going to have a new video podcast starting in the fall called The World of Geoffrey Mark, where I tell some of these stories and interview only close friends of mine who are in the business. So conversations with friends who are famous. And sometimes it'll just be an hour of me talking, telling stories on a theme. So you can look for that in the fall. And I come out of your electric toothbrush if you turn it on. And I had a wonderful joke that was too naughty for this show, but please know, in my heart, I give you a wonderful dirty joke. Just fill in your own punchline and laugh.
I think it truly, like in a career, like I said, and number one, congratulations on 50 years of being in the business. But, you touched on this briefly, and I don't want to go into what you saw and because it's traumatic as it is.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, but you talked about John Lennon. And let me just ask you this, Geoffrey. How do you, as someone who had to witness something like that, how did you overcome? Like, I mean, because to have to, I'm sure there were for many years you thought about that once a day, because how do you not? But how were you able to get past seeing something like that and being a witness to that? Because that's very traumatic for anybody. I don't care if you're 12 years old or 50 years old. That's very traumatic.
Well,
So
let's tell our friends out there what we're talking about.
yeah,
I was living in Manhattan. I had the same girlfriend who took me to my first audition, lived on 72nd Street near Central Park West. John Lennon and Lauren Bacall and a whole bunch of other people lived in a huge luxury iconic building right at the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West in Manhattan on the west side. And it was a cool evening, and I just didn't feel like walking in the cool. It was too cool for me just to walk. So I took the subway. The subway lets you out then and now on Central Park West around the corner from 72nd Street. The building was called the Dakota. And I was walking briskly because it was cool, but not the noise you were hearing is someone trying to get a hold of me electronically, and I am turning them down so I can talk to you, and I apologize for that.
Oh, no worries at all. Yeah.
But the cold kept me brisk. The Dakota, there was no front door on 72nd Street. It was an archway into a courtyard that was like a little park. Then if you made a left, there was the front door, and there was the doorman and all the services that a luxury building provides in New York City. And in those days, the arch was open. There's a driveway where you could pull a limousine in if someone, again, to have the privacy of not being on the street. I put one foot into the driveway and bang, bang, bang. I put the second foot in, and what I saw was, because the courtyard was only lit by little, not lanterns, but little small little lights. And what I could clearly see was that man whose name I won't mention, because the light hit his face. So I could see his face standing over a dead body with a gun pointed down like this. I couldn't even see Yoko because she was way in the back. If you think of his courtyard as a great big rectangle, where I'm on the long side here, she's on the long side in the back in the shadows. Well, this guy turned and looked at me. So now I'm looking at him in the light. He's looking at me, and I ran like a thief. I ran against traffic across the street to my dear Phyllis's apartment. I had a key to her place. I let myself in. She was taking a bath. So I turned on the television, and that evening, Channel 9, what was then called WOR TV in New York, they were the first people to go on the air that John had been killed. That's when I found out what I had seen.
Right.
Because John was in shadows. I couldn't see his face. I freaked out. I went into the bathroom. I sat on the John, and Phyllis was in the bathtub trying to keep me calm. We went to dinner. When I calmed down, what I felt mostly was, good heavens, Geoffrey Mark, what a coward you are. You didn't call 911 when you got in her place. When you found out who it was, you didn't reach out to anybody and say, I saw it. And I have his face in my head, and I can recognize him, and I could, point at him in a lineup. I did nothing. And for many years, I felt like a coward. The cowardice overwhelmed the trauma, because I felt, Jeff, you're an awful guy. You abandoned this man and ran for your own safety. And what has lifted that is I happened to be in touch with Sean, his son, and told him all of this. And he said, Jeff, forgive yourself, because there is nothing you could have done. There is nothing. He was caught. He was caught in 5 minutes. The police were there. They didn't need you to identify anybody. He was already dead. You couldn't have saved his life. What might have happened is that you might have gotten yourself hurt. And he
Right.
said, forgive yourself. Since then, it's been a little easier for me. But yeah, watching someone get shot to death, you never get that out of your eyes.
Yeah.
Just
And,
something one has to live with.
yeah. And you really think about this too, Geoffrey. He was a legend probably 15 years before that happened. But just think about, had he lived, he would have made so much more music. And I really do truly believe this, that we would have seen a Beatles reunion eventually. And he just was robbed of so many things in his life over something so meaningless, like just made no sense whatsoever. And I mean, that's the thing that is really the tragedy.
I don't think murder ever makes sense.
Yeah.
It's wrong. It's wrong no matter who this victim is or who the murderer is. I don't care what intellectualization one makes. Well, it's okay to kill this person. No, it's always wrong. It is always not the right thing to do. It solves nothing.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that most, not all, most people who murder are mentally ill. And it's why people talk about gun safety. Not that hunters are murdering people, but that people who have no business having a gun in their lives are murdering people.
Yeah.
That's the sadness of this. But I have this Forrest Gump thing about my life. I witnessed twice from the outside bank robberies in Lower Manhattan. I just seem to find myself there, sometimes for good, sometimes not so good.
Right. So let me ask you this, Geoffrey. You mentioned that a new Lucy book's coming out. You've also talked about your book that's coming out, which I can't wait to see.
Thank you.
Are there any more surprises that we could look forward to from 24 and beyond in the next few years? What do you?
Well, some of it will be a surprise to me too, because you can plan all you want. There's a wonderful Yiddish expression, Menschen trachten, Gott lacht, which means men plan and God laughs. So
Yeah.
who knows? I was supposed to have had an album coming out next year. Now I don't know if that's going to happen. The World of Geoffrey Mark is going to happen, so look for that in the fall. There is going to be a 50th anniversary in show business party thrown for me in late September.
Oh,
So
nice.
that's going to be a lot of fun and be a lot of celebrities, and I'm going to sing. I'm going to perform at my own party.
And where's that going to be at?
Oh, that's just a private home.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just happy to know people who think enough of me to spend the money, and they have a huge house. There's actually a performing space dedicated in their house. So I look forward to that. And like most things, there are projects, there are opportunities that come one's way that one can't expect. I was nominated for a Grammy for something I did not expect. To get a phone call one day, "Hi, Jeff, I'm so and so. I'm a producer." And I'll make that long story short. We're releasing Ella's work on Decca. That was the first 20 years of her recording career. Had never been released on CD. There was a legal problem. We've solved the legal problem. He said, I called 10 people in the jazz world asking who should work on this with me. And all 10 of them gave me your phone number.
Wow.
And from that conversation that I didn't look for came a Grammy nomination. So sometimes things happen, but more often things happen because you put the work in. And even that kind of serendipity, well, if I hadn't spent years and years and years writing the first of the two books, I wouldn't have gotten the call. But it wasn't like I was knocking on doors like, I'd really like to be nominated for a Grammy. Could we do something to get? No, it came to me.
Right. Well, Geoffrey, I look forward to, more work from you, and I can't wait to see the stuff that you're going to let out there for us to see. But I really do congratulate you on 50 years in the business. That's a
Thank you.
remarkable achievement. I really applaud everything you do. And just keep up the great work, because we love watching your work. And this radio show that you do for Ella, I think is your greatest work. I really do, because you're paying tribute to somebody who really deserves it. And
Thank
thank
you.
you for giving me a few minutes today. I really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. You're good at what you do. You're nice looking. Hey, just takes a compliment.
Yeah.
And have me back.
Yeah, definitely. We will talk once that book comes out. And thank you again for giving me some time. And keep doing what you're doing, my friend, because you are one of the best.
And all of you out there who are watching, I really appreciate you, because I love my audiences too.
Sounds good. Thank you again, Geoffrey. Really appreciate it. For In the Spotlight, he's Geoffrey Mark. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.